Your car is on a truck. You are standing in the driveway watching it go, and you are mildly annoyed rather than upset because nobody was hurt and the insurance is handling it. Somebody on the phone used a phrase a few days ago that you did not question. They said the car was a total loss. You pictured a wreck, a write-off, something finished. You will never see that car again, and you will never find out what happened to it. Here is what happens to it. Over the next 2 years, that one vehicle will be sold 4 separate times to 4 completely different kinds of buyer, and there is a real chance that one of them will be on another continent. Every one of those 4 sales makes somebody money. None of them make you any. And the company that will earn the most from your car is not the one that repairs cars, or the one that sells parts, or the one that crushes metal. It is a company that will never own your car at all. It will never buy it, never take the risk of what it sells for, and never touch a spanner. Last year it earned about $4.6 billion and kept $1.6 billion of that as pure profit. That is a net margin of around 35%, higher than Apple. It is doing this out of a muddy field behind a chain-link fence with green slats jammed through it. So what is it actually selling? Because it is not cars, and it is not parts. It is selling dirt. Hold on to that word, because it means 2 completely different things at once, and I am not going to tell you the second one yet. There is also one part of your car, roughly a fifth of it by weight, that has no buyer anywhere on Earth at any price. Nobody advertises that number. We will get to it. Start with the phrase, because it was the first thing you were told, and it was not quite true. Total loss is not a description of damage. It is a sum. The insurer runs a threshold, typically somewhere between 65 and 80% depending on the state and the company, and the calculation is roughly this. What would repairs cost? And what could we get for the car if we did not repair it? And how does that total compare to what the car is worth? Cross the line, and it is cheaper to write you a check and take the vehicle away. Now look closely at what sits inside that sum, the salvage value. The insurer is not only avoiding a repair bill, it is acquiring an asset from you, and the price it pays for that asset is a check you were expecting anyway. And that line is being crossed far more often than it used to be. Total loss frequency in the United States recently hit a record of around 23% of all claims. Nearly 1 damaged car in 4 is now taken away rather than fixed. Not because people crash harder. 2 other things changed. The fleet got old. The average car on American roads is now about 12.5 years old, so the value side of the sum is low before you start, and cars got nervous systems. There is radar in the bumper, a camera behind the windscreen, ultrasonic sensors in the panels, and calibration procedures that have to be performed after any of it is disturbed. A parking speed knock that was a $200 bumper in 1995 is a $4,000 repair now because there is electronics behind the plastic, which means your car was probably not badly damaged, it was uneconomic. Those are very different things, and everything that follows lives in the gap between them. Now the ladder, 4 rungs. Your car goes down all of them, and each one is faster and cheaper than the one above. Rung 1 is the best outcome, and almost nobody guesses it. Your car gets sold whole and driven again. This is where that $4.6 billion company lives, and you may have seen the name on a gate, Copart. Its main competitor is insurance auto auctions. What they do is run the auction where the insurer disposes of your car, and how they get paid is the entire trick. On most of the volume, they never buy the vehicle. They take it on consignment from the insurer, and they earn fees. Fees from the seller for handling it, and fees from the buyer for winning it. Gate fees, loading fees, documentation fees, virtual bidding fees, storage fees, which means they are insulated from the one risk you would assume defines this industry. They do not much care what your car sells for. They are not betting on used car prices or scrap prices. Cars go in, fees come out, and the person carrying the price risk is whoever raised their hand. So who raised their hand? This is the part that startles people. A very large share of the bidding is not American. Copart has said itself that around 40% of its United States transactions come from buyers in places like Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Africa, which means there is a real possibility that your car was bought sight unseen by somebody in Lagos, or Tbilisi, or Santo Domingo, put in a container, shipped across an ocean, repaired with labor that costs a fraction of American labor, and driven for another 10 years in a country where a 12-year-old Toyota with a bent bumper is a genuinely valuable object. Sit with what that means. Your car was never broken. It was in the wrong labor market. The write-off was a statement about the price of a mechanic in Ohio and nothing whatsoever about the car. Rung 2 is where the car stops being a car. It goes to a dismantler, and it becomes a list. A single mid-size vehicle might yield 200 to 300 sellable items: doors, seats, mirrors, headlights, wheels, engine, transmission, control modules, alternator, steering rack. And the maths on each item is superb, because a good used door might sell for a couple of $100 against $700 or $800 for a new one from the manufacturer, while the yard's cost for that door is a slice of what it paid for the whole vehicle. The largest operator here is enormous. LKQ turns over somewhere in the region of $13 to $14 billion a year, and by its own reporting, it processed around 284,000 vehicles in a year and pushed close to 5 million recycled parts back into the repair market. But notice the trap in this rung, because it is the same trap the whole industry is built around. A part is only worth money if somebody nearby needs that exact part. So the yard has to keep the car on the ground, outside, for months, sometimes years, waiting for one specific customer to walk through the gate and ask for one specific thing, which means the business is not really storing cars. It is renting time on land. Remember that. Rung 3 is the one that climbed out of the industry and into the street, and it is the most concentrated value in the entire vehicle. The catalytic converter is a ceramic honeycomb coated in 3 of the most expensive metals on Earth: platinum, palladium, and rhodium. And rhodium went vertical a few years ago, at points trading around $20,000 an ounce, peaking near 27, which turned a dull cylinder bolted under a family car into something close to a bearer bond that could be reached with a saw in 90 seconds. What happened next is the clearest proof you will ever see that a scrap price is not an abstraction. Thefts exploded nationwide, tracking the metals market almost perfectly. Researchers have since mapped the rise and fall of converter theft directly against the price of palladium and rhodium. And look at the asymmetry, because it is obscene. A stolen converter typically fetched somewhere around $100 to $250. Replacing it on the victim's car ran into the thousands. And sometimes that repair pushed the car over the threshold, made it a total loss, and dropped it right back at the top of this same ladder. Nobody in the industry stole anything. The industry simply published a price per unit, and in far too many places asked no questions. The street read the signal correctly. Rung 4 is the floor, and it is the reason this business is almost impossible to kill. Whatever did not sell as a car, and did not sell as parts, becomes weight. The stripped shell is called a hulk, and it is sold by the ton. Scrap steel has recently been running around $150 to $200 a ton, which puts a complete stripped car somewhere between $200 and $500 depending on what it weighs. And that is the structural fact that separates salvage from nearly every other business on Earth. There is a hard floor under every single object. A clothing shop that misjudges demand eats a total loss. A salvage yard that misjudges demand still owns 1,500 kilograms of steel. The worst case is not zero, and a business whose worst case is not zero survives things that kill everybody else. The hulk goes to a shredder, where an industrial hammer mill reduces an entire car to fist-sized fragments in under a minute, and magnets and air blowers sort the steel from the aluminium from the copper. And now the number nobody puts on the brochure: between 15 and 25% of the weight of your car, at this stage, is a material called auto shredder residue. The industry calls it fluff. It is the foam out of your seats, the carpet, the dashboard plastic, the rubber, the glass, the wiring insulation, the sound deadening, all shredded together into a gray fibrous mass that cannot practically be separated into anything and cannot be sold to anyone. It goes into the ground. Millions of tons of it a year. So the real ending of your car is not a neat crushed cube like the cartoons. It was disassembled into money 4 times over, and then there was one pile left that was nobody's asset and everybody's problem, buried in a landfill, still holding the shape of your back seat. Now, I am not going to hand you a simple villain here, because on this one, the honest version cuts the other way. The received wisdom is that junkyards are a grubby business at the edge of the law. What is actually true is that this is the single most successful recycling operation humanity has ever built. Around 95% of American cars enter the recycling stream at the end of their lives, and roughly 80 to 85% of a vehicle by weight is recovered. Cars are the most recycled consumer product on Earth, and it has nothing to do with virtue. It happens because a car is heavy, it is made of valuable uniform metal, and somebody will pay you for it. Recycling works flawlessly wherever the material has resale value, and it works almost nowhere else. That is the entire recycling debate, compressed into one industry. The parts trade is not a con either. Recycled original parts are far cheaper than new ones, and they are the reason a 15-year-old car with a smashed mirror gets repaired instead of abandoned. Every dismantled car keeps several other cars on the road, disproportionately for people who cannot buy their way out of a repair bill. The genuine harm here is narrower and much more specific, and it is paperwork. A salvage brand is supposed to follow a car forever, and it knocks something like 20 to 50% off the value, which is exactly the information a buyer needs. But branding is administered state by state, with different thresholds and different rules, so moving a car between states can rub the brand off the history. The practice has a name: title washing, and it is how a structurally compromised car appears on a forecourt 3 states away looking clean. That is a real harm, and it is a clerical one, not a scrapyard one. Which brings us to the fact that explains why the auction company earns a 35% margin, while the yard down the road with the dog and the fence earns almost nothing. Copart operates over 21,000 acres of land, and it owns more than 90% of it outright. Not leases, owns. That is the business, because think about what this work physically demands. Hundreds of acres, within towing distance of a major city, zoned industrial, permitted for vehicle storage and for oil and fuel and coolant in the ground, with drainage, with truck access. Now try to assemble that today, next to any American city. You cannot. The land has been eaten by warehouses and housing. The zoning is fought at every hearing. Permitting takes years, and there is no council in the country that wants to approve a fresh field of wrecked cars near anybody who votes. The supply of that exact kind of land is effectively fixed, and it was quietly bought decades ago by a man who started with one lot in Vallejo, California in 1982, when it was cheap precisely because nobody else wanted it. That is the second meaning of dirt. It is not the mud. It is the reason nobody competed for it. This entire industry was protected for 40 years by being unglamorous. The disgust was the moat. A field of rusting cars looked so obviously like the bottom of the economy that the people who would otherwise have bid the land up never looked at it twice, and the door quietly welded itself shut behind the few who did. And there is one more line in this that turns the fee model into something sharper. Storage. While a car sits, the clock runs, and somebody is billed by the day. That is a revenue stream that rewards delay, which points at the ugliest corner of this business. The tow you did not agree to, off private property, or away from a crash, into a lot with a release fee and a nightly rate. The person who owns the car has no leverage at all. It is behind a locked gate. The bill grows every night, and the only way to stop the meter is to pay it. States police this with wildly varying levels of enthusiasm. So where does the money in a junkyard actually come from? Not from cars, 3 layers stacked on one very cheap input. There is the auction layer, where fees are taken from both the seller and the buyer on a vehicle the auction house never bought, which is why the margin is vast and the risk is close to none. There is the harvest layer, where one car becomes 200 or 300 separate items, each sold at a large multiple of its share of the purchase price, to somebody with no realistic alternative. And underneath both of those, the weight layer, where the guaranteed money lives, because a broker will always buy metal by the ton whether or not anybody wanted the object it used to be. And under all three sits the land. The only part of this that cannot be imported, automated, disrupted, or competed away, bought for almost nothing, by people who understood something everybody else was too squeamish to look at. Which means the customer you assumed was central to this was never central at all. Not the man in the yard on a Saturday, pulling a mirror off a Civic. Not even the buyer bidding from 4,000 miles away. The customer is the insurance company. It is the only party in this story that arrives every week with volume, forever, under contract. And you were not the customer either. Go back to the driveway. The moment somebody said total loss, you stopped being a policyholder with a damaged car. You became a scheduled delivery. 1.5 tons of sorted, pre-titled, prepaid raw material, arriving at a landowner's gate on a truck you did not book, on a date you were not consulted about. Your car was never wrecked. It was harvested, and you paid the deductible for the privilege of dropping it off.